we live in a culture where sexuality is socially constructed. Due to this, certain sexual norms, behaviors, and identities are either stigmatized or reinforced to support the societal constructs pertaining to sexuality. Many would argue that homosexuality has been around since the beginning of time. However, this term and others associated with it have recently emerged into our culture's language regarding sexuality. By creating and defining the class of homosexuality, heterosexuality is also subsequently constructed. Our culture believes in the idea of the Kinsey scale, which emphasizes the notion that a person is either heterosexual or homosexual. In this scale of 0 to 6, 0 being exclusively heterosexual and 6 being exclusively homosexual, it's commonly assumed by our culture that individuals fall at one end of the scale or the other. This socially constructed belief overlooks the reality that many people fall in the middle of the Kinsey scale, which as a result disregards those who identify with a fluid sexuality. Consequently, this forces these individuals to be placed within only one of these categories of exclusively homosexual or exclusively heterosexual. The construction of these two categories within our culture has inevitably created the hierarchy where heterosexuality is standardized over homosexuality. Because heterosexuality is considered unmarked in society, aka the norm, it is also considered the default sexuality until proven otherwise. Due to the idea that heterosexuality is normalized within our society, this standard is prevalent in school curriculum. Most schools approach and enforce the subject of sexuality from a heteronormative stance, therefore creating heterosexuality as neutral. Subsequently, queer behaviors and desires are repressed because of the lack of discourse in sex ed curriculum about homosexuality. The culture and environment of so many high schools enable straight students to express themselves freely, ultimately reinforcing productive power. In contrast, self-expression is repressed for students who are queer, emphasizing the concept of repressive power or the repressive hypothesis as described by Freud. Those who already experience repression as members of a minority group, such as being black or physically disabled, are much less likely to publicly identify as gay in fear of further discrimination. This illustrates intersectionality in that everyone has a position within the social structures of gender, race, class, sexuality, age, and ability. Combinations of these structures create unique life outcomes and commonly increase the chances of discrimination. The limited discourse that exists within school curriculum regarding homosexuality is almost entirely negative. This discourse primarily places emphasis on the issues linked to queer youth, such as suicide, drug abuse, depression, and confusion. These statements focus largely on the negative consequences that are associated with being young and gay, rather than having any emphasis on the truth regarding the normality of homosexuality, gay joy, or the pleasure of same-sex sex. Anti-gay activists use repressive power by highlighting the negative aspects of homosexuality as a means to discourage people from adopting a gay identity, thereby reproducing the socially constructed appeal that heterosexuality is normative. The reinforcement of heteronormativity is not only found inside of the classroom, but also in society as a whole. Our society is accustomed to the idea that gender, sex, and sexuality go hand in hand and are dependent on each other. It is expected that one's gender should match their sexuality, such as a straight woman portraying femininity. Discrimination and homophobia and transphobia commonly arise in cases where an individual's gender and sexuality do not match up and don't emphasize heteronormativity. Heteronormativity is reinforced within G-rated movies by the way they portray relationships between characters. In the majority of the films, the plots are focused around a heteroromantic relationship between a male and a female character. These relationships are depicted in a much more vivid, magical, and exciting way, especially when compared to any other type of relationship like friendships. Heteronormativity is illustrated through the way these characters look and act by embodying typical gender and racial stereotypes. Female characters are often represented as sexual objects or damsels in distress, while the males are depicted as heroic and hypermasculine, further emphasizing that men and women are fundamentally opposite. Ultimately, these narratives highlight what society deems as acceptable in terms of sexuality. In conclusion, heterosexuality and heteronormativity are explicitly portrayed as the accepted norms in our society. It is clear that we live in a culture where sexuality is socially constructed. Our evidence has shown that certain sexual norms, behaviors, and identities are either stigmatized or reinforced through various discourses, depictions, and idealized standards, all of which support the societal constructs pertaining to sexuality.